Here's our crew. All right, so we are live. My name is Craig Shield and Jesse Gilchrist, maybe you can wave. So we are the two people who organized this professional development. We called it hashtag SEU25 Book Chat, and it was open to anybody in our own district as well as outside of our district. And the book that we read for the first time, do you mind showing the book? You showcase or read Empower by John Spencer and AJ Giuliani. And we are very fortunate that John has agreed to join in on a little Q&A. Yeah, we'll take it from there. I don't know if you want to do a little intro, John, yourself before we ask questions.
No, I'm just happy to be here. I'm honored. I appreciate it.
Well, I will say that I know that you and AJ have inspired and have really sparked some questions and thoughts and ideas in our own district as well as outside the district. So, definitely thank you very much. And I will say, as a non-reader myself, I admit that a lot to people. I particularly enjoyed the format of the book. I particularly enjoyed the pictures, the visuals, the different fonts. So as a non-reader, I enjoyed that myself. But why don't we go ahead and who wants to ask a question? We'll take it from there. Anybody?
I'll start. I'm not in camera, but I'll start because here I am. Hi. So it kind of piggybacks off what Craig said with him being like a non-reader. So if we have, staff members and teachers who are not as excited as us to read this book, any suggestions for how maybe you can kind of get the message this book sends out about empowering students and student choice and how we can get others excited about this who may not want to read?
Yeah, I like that question. So, I'm getting a slight echo. I'm going to try putting my headphones in because I'm realizing that's probably what's causing the echoes. But when I do this, it sometimes gets like there's a scratch. Is it scratchy suddenly?
No.
Okay, cool. So here's what I would say. I really think that it depends on the type of person you're talking to. So when you talk about empowering students, some teachers, they don't want to change because they don't want to feel like everything they've been doing is wrong. And the truth is that they haven't been doing things wrong. You're not asking them to, you're not telling them that what they're doing is wrong. You're saying, hey, let's take it to the next level. So I think some teachers need to be affirmed for the great things that they're already doing before they take that next step into giving students more voice and choice. And I personally think, coming from a K-12 environment and then now working here at a university, teachers just don't get affirmed enough. It is a hard job, and we need to be encouraging one another. And I think that there are many teachers who aren't going to make a shift in what they do until they are first affirmed for the great things they're already doing. So I think that's kind of one segment. I think some teachers, they're not going to change. They're not going to think about changing because they're afraid. And so I think if you can mitigate fear for some teachers, that's another piece. That's why I specifically, included that piece in the book and talked about the whole notion of like my big project where we had actual student ownership was during testing week, because I knew that if a principal didn't like it, I could just say, yeah, they're watching Cars in the other room, right? Like they're literally watching movies in the other room. It's the most low risk day around. And then I think what I've learned for other teachers is they're just very, very tired, and the sort of in route for changing toward more student ownership is kind of letting them know that this actually frees up more time for the teachers, that it's not more work, that you know, when the more and more my students were working hard and owning the process, the more relaxed I felt, you know, the more energy I had, the more, because I wasn't always on. And so for some, it's actually the way that you talk to them about it is saying, hey, you can work fewer hours, be less tired, and be less stressed. And for some teachers, that's what they need to hear right now because they are just exhausted, especially come April and May. Um, and that was my experience, you know, in working middle school. But I think it's even more so with the elementary teachers I've worked with, and even with some of the high school teachers and the sheer number of events that they're doing and this and that. So I really think it depends on the teacher that you're talking to. The last thing I'll say is I think principals play a huge role in this. That leaders need to step up and say, this is what good pedagogy looks like, but also they need to say, you're going to make mistakes along the way and that's okay. And so I think leaders kind of have a role to say. So sorry, I feel like I gave a 9-minute answer to what should have been a 1-minute question. I'll try to keep my answer shorter.
No, that's fine. That's fine. And I'll say in this group, we actually have 3 administrators in this little group here too. So I think that was a very important piece that I think a lot of teachers are also worry. Oh, if I do something a little different, and how is it going to look? Oh, you know. So I think that is an important statement. What you had just said. I do know that I'll go ahead and say this. We were very thrilled to have a wide range of teachers join us. And so we actually had several math teachers join in on this book chat. And I know a couple of them asked, a lot of the ideas in the book seem to go very well in terms of a humanities setting. And we're more so curious if there are resources out there or ideas in how teachers can better empower their students in a math setting, you know, because it does look a little different than a humanities, world language kind of setting. And we just didn't know if you had any ideas or suggestions with that mindset in a math class.
Yeah. So, you know, one of the things that I think about is, you know, with the standards, there's always the loose and the tight. So where is the freedom built into each standard? And I have a grid that I created for a blog post on this. I can send that to you afterwards, where I basically look at, you know, where's the loose and where's the tight in the particular standards. And so something like interest-driven projects like Genius Hour, things like that, the loose is on the topics. You can learn whatever topic, whatever concept you want, but the tight is on the actual skills that are being practiced. On the other hand, with math, you might have very tight concepts, but your processes for getting there are loose. And so, you know, I would ask, first of all, in the standards, where's their freedom for ownership in the actual standards? Now, what this actually looks like, I found, is you know, it depends on the standards that we're teaching. So I would say, for example, when I taught math, I didn't always do project-based learning for math or design thinking for math. Those were limited to specific standards that fit well with it. And so when we did proportional reasoning, volume, and surface area, we did a tiny house project. And there was some direct instruction, but there was a lot of discovery. There was a lot of wonder. There was a lot of students owning the question process and kind of discovering those concepts on their own, because you can't understand proportional reasoning through direct instruction alone. It won't make sense. You have to experience it and see it and discover it. Volume and surface area, they take practice. So what's the best way to make practice interesting? Having them practicing it through actually designing something on their own. So the tiny house project, the type was the concepts. They had 3 very specific concepts: proportional reasoning, volume, and surface area. I added rate and money as a review aspect, so they had to keep their tiny house under a specific budget. But that being said, how they went about going, discovering this was much more loose. And so that worked well. On the other hand, linear equations, negative positive integers, we just had to practice those things. The key thing there was student ownership and letting them own the process was more along the lines of choosing your own strategies or doing mental math and comparing and contrasting the approaches that they took. And one of my favorite examples of that, and I know a lot of people who are into math already know about this, but Dan Meyer did a TED Talk years ago on the whole "what can you do with it" approach to math, where you give students a scenario, not a problem, and then you have them develop the problem, solve it, compare strategies, and move on from there. And to me, that's really like an adjustable systems approach to math. So I think it's possible in math. You just have to kind of work within those creative constraints. I think it might be a little easier in language arts, but it's definitely possible in math.
Okay, thank you.
I'm going to piggyback off of that a little bit. This question's coming from someone that's chiming in online.
Yeah.
They're saying, when giving students multiple types of assessment or a variety of tools and the power to choose the right fit, have you found it necessary to pre-teach all of the options, or do you mini lesson, or what are your suggestions?
I think for some things you do a pre-teach or mini lesson. For other things, you kind of do a guided practice where you learn as you go. And then for a number of things, especially with introducing a new format or a new type of assessment, or, especially in teaching middle school, which is what I taught, I think they can figure things out on their own more than we think. So one of the things I did a lot was testing something out that was new without pre-teaching it or showing how it works, and then watching them try to determine how something works and get a little bit frustrated to tell me what I actually need to teach. So instead of pre-teaching a structure or a strategy or a concept, I would actually start with something more open where they have to figure it out on their own. And then that in itself, kind of observing them, becomes a formative assessment. And it's tough. It is really hard to let kids struggle. And yet that's how learning works, right? I mean, if we all think of the best things we learned in the last year, chances are there was some level of struggle involved in it.
It's true. I'm going to ask, unless somebody else has that. Yeah, go for it. Yeah.
Hello, I
Yeah.
kind of see who I am now.
Hey there.
My name's Tyler. I'm an English teacher at Bedford High School, and kind of piggybacking off of Jesse's question, one thing I was wondering about was how much scaffolding do you have to do in terms of establishing the trust and that classroom environment to allow kids to feel comfortable to fail and to, grow through these challenges and begin to experiment and be willing to experiment, particularly at the high school level for us. If they haven't had a lot of that type of experience in the lower levels, it can be kind of shocking for them when they get to our classrooms and they're asked to do something kind of totally outside of what they're comfortable with. So I guess I'm asking for ideas or just the level of scaffolding that you think might be appropriate for them to be willing to fail to become successful down the line.
Yeah, I really think it depends on the age group, the context. I think with students, for example, at the high school level, with students who are, AP honors level, a lot of them struggle with the student ownership piece because they're so good at playing the game of school. And for them, I think it's a disruptive process. And it's not so much giving them a scaffold, it's allowing them to see the value in it. And, I worked with a teacher who, for him, he preferred the term, and I'm not as crazy about it, but he preferred the term detox. That there's a detox period of about a week where they just have to get used to the fact that there's going to be more choice and more ownership, and it's going to be more vague. And he says that detox period is hard. The kids get angry with him. By the end of the year, they loved his class, but he basically went the opposite route of, instead of a lot of team building and building trust that way, he really started out saying, you guys might hate me this first week, but we're starting out with full choice, and it's kind of a shock to your system, and you'll get used to it. And then they loved it. My approach was a lot different. I started out with kind of scaffolding the choice itself. So I would start out with, we're going to do a project where you choose your own topic. And I'm going to guide you through the design thinking process. And in it, I'm going to ask you to ask your own questions that can be on whatever they want. And I'm going to give you some sentence stems, and I kind of walk them through the process. I did a lot of guided practice. And I was really focusing on culture and risk taking, and reminding them that certain things weren't graded and that was okay. And, sharing a quick story about someone I knew that was very risk averse, that learned how to take risks. And I mean, that was my approach. So again, this person said it's going to be full-fledged choice, shock to your system, detox, and then run with it. And my approach was more of a gradual release scaffold of choice. So I started with topic, and then asking questions, and then we moved into owning the processes and selecting your own scaffold that you need. And then eventually it became more self-assessment and peer assessment, and owning the assessment process. And each week I would say actually every week and a half to 2 weeks, I was adding a new level of choice and ownership to the process, so that by the end of the first quarter, there was a lot of student ownership, but it felt very gradual. And so again, I taught middle school, he taught high school, I taught students who were ELL, he taught students who were AP. So some of it depends on your context, some of it's the teacher personality. I also didn't want my kids to hate me the first week of school. So there was that, just being 100% honest with you.
I will follow up on that. So the community piece to that. So it's one thing to detox the kids, but education now, the parents and the community are all hyper-focused on, the grades and the fairness and the rubrics and what kind of a I don't want to say sales job, but kind of a sales job. What do you need to do to get the community to buy into this process?
Oh, no, absolutely. So I actually worked with, I taught in a low-income Title I school in Phoenix. I now live in Oregon. But I did a design thinking workshop with a staff in a pretty elite private school in Canada. And then I came back a couple weeks later, or I guess a month later, and we did 2 days of student-centered design projects. And it was very different. This class was this school was all about rank, and all about, getting into the perfect university and all of that kind of stuff. And I had to win over the students by talking to them about some of these ideas, like the whole concept that the corporate ladder has become a maze. The notion of, Google and Project Zero, and how they found that problem solving and collaboration were more important than what university you came from. And there were a couple parents who were not thrilled with us the first day. And so we scheduled a parent night later. Now, the second day students, I mean, it went really well the second day, and a lot of, I mean, there was, it was just cool. There were kids cheering things and getting excited, and then we had a lot of parents show up to the parent night, and it was the same thing. What I said was, you know, the ladder is a maze, and we need students to be problem solvers. We need, I guess what I would say when I talk to the parents is, I began with the question of what do, you know, the ladder maze thing, and then I asked them the question, what will they need to thrive in a world that's now a maze, and where the corporate ladder's gone? And they gave all those same answers on their own. So it didn't come from me. It was problem solving, creativity, you know, being independent, being you know, all these different things. And then from there we talked about what types of things. I opened it up to the parents and said, what are the types of things you use in your job when you do projects? You know, what types of people fail in projects? And inevitably, the person that doesn't learn how to do things on their own, the person who can't work with others, the person. And then from there, I asked the question, how does traditional schooling either help or hurt the types of project work you actually do in the workforce? And overwhelmingly, they described how either peers they worked with or they themselves struggled going from a university into the workforce. And these were people who had really successful careers, you know, or they struggled when they went from high school into the university because suddenly there was no hand-holding. And so, you know, no parent wants to hear that they're a helicopter, but if they can discover it on their own a little bit, and they can kind of say, okay, there's a real upside to this, this approach, then you've won them over, because ultimately that was the piece, was getting them to see that it's necessary. I personally think student ownership isn't just about getting a better job, but I know that when you talk to parents, they're all about, I want to make sure my kid gets the right kind of job.
Thank you.
I want to be aware of time, because I know we said that we would only take a half hour of your time here. But I do want to ask, I think this is an important question that's on a lot of people's minds, of assessing. How do you assess these types of projects? So like if we're giving student choice and we're required rubrics and we have to, you know, all of these things, how do you fairly and equitably assess students when one might do an interpretive dance and someone else might write an essay? Like how do you go about that?
Yeah, so one of the things that we didn't get into a ton in Empower is, you know, we talked about self-assessment, peer assessment, the teacher conference systems, things like that. But you know, one of the things I wish I'd made more clear on that particular chapter is, for me, there was a paradigm shift where I'm not going to focus on assessing the product, and I'm not even going to focus on assessing the process. I'm going to use any demonstration, any performance, any observation necessary to truly get an accurate picture of whether or not they're learning the standard. So, you know, the way we did it was we just had a grid, and it had every standard, every power standard, which are kind of the driving standards, in student-friendly language. And then I would meet with students one-on-one, and you know, they would say where they thought they were in the standard, I would say where I thought they were, and then we would have a separate space where we would put evidence of mastery. So a student might say, I'm making great inferences, da, 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 and then I would be able to say, okay, I'm seeing it here, I'm not seeing it there. And we're actually, you know, sometimes pulling out student work. And that was the shift that allowed students to know, what they don't know, and what they need to figure out. And because of those student conferences, it was pretty subjective, but because I was also helping decide, I wasn't focused on having a rubric for every single type of assignment. You know, our rubrics were more formative assessment that they were doing to judge their own product or their own process. But the ultimate grading that was going on was, did you master this standard? What does it look like? And how do we know you got there? That was ultimately the shift. It was saying, I'm not interested in assessing your product. I'm interested in assessing your learning. And that took a long time to get there. And that was the hardest piece for students to get. I almost don't like talking about that because it's one of those things that gets people nervous because it's so different. But I guess that's my answer, is that was the approach.
Is there any
Sorry, my answers are so long. I can talk a little bit longer too, by the way. Like I just, it's weird. Like if I'm physically in person, I'll answer things shorter, and then if I'm like writing something, it's different. But then the minute I get on like a Google Hangout, I just ramble. Sorry.
It's all good. It's all good. We've been enjoying listening to what you're saying. Does anybody else want to quickly ask? We have like 2 more minutes. 2 more minutes. I mean, I'll find another one on here. Let's see. Yeah, we asked about parents, right? What skills do you think are essential for students to be able to move into self-directed learning?
Ooh, I love that. So I think they have to have really good metacognition. And I love the metacognition cycle and getting students to think through that. Being able to know, what they don't know, self-awareness. They have to have initiative. They also need to have the ability to find resources. They need to be flexible. And they need to not be afraid. I think fear is one of the biggest things that keeps people from being self-directed. They need to kind of trust themselves. And that's a lot. That's why I love when entire schools decide that they're going to make student ownership a priority, because then things begin to change at kind of the systems level. It's a lot harder to try to, get a whole class to be self-directed when it's just one class, but when a whole school is making it a priority, I think it becomes a lot easier. I love these questions, by the way. These are so cool. They're great questions.
Yeah. Well, we truly thank you for your time. I think that you have a room full of lifelong fans and followers and beyond that are watching from all over the state. So we thank you for taking the time out to be with us today.
Oh, thanks.
Empowering.
Yes.
No, but seriously, we know that you say, I'm assuming you're at your university? Right?
Yeah.
Yeah, you are. And then I know there's a big time change and all of that. So no, we truly do appreciate you reaching out. So thank you very much. And we look forward to connecting with you in the future.
Absolutely. Thank you.
All right. Bye, John. Thank you.
All right. Bye-bye.